How's it going, everybody? Massive fight coming up this weekend. Josh Taylor, former undisputed light welterweight champion, against Teofimo Lopez, former undisputed lightweight champion. I mean, this is a mega fight, and in my opinion, I think it's went under the radar a wee bit. I think I would have been talking about this fight 18 months ago. The whole world would have been talking about it. Boxing fans obviously know about this fight because they're two incredible fighters. But in terms of the attention that it's getting in not the boxing press, the sporting press, the back pages and the papers over here in the UK anyway, I think certainly it's went under the radar. Add that to the fact that it is being staged in the Garden, but not the Garden, the annex to the Garden, a little bit beside it, which is a capacity of, I think, 5,000. This fight is a much, much bigger fight than that, and it's a shame that they're having it in such a small arena. If this fight had came to Edinburgh or Glasgow, Edinburgh especially, Josh Taylor's always talked about fighting outdoor at the Edinburgh Castle. I mean, you build a purpose arena, does 20,000 seats there, no problem, and possibly more if you could build a bigger arena. Genuinely, that's how big a name Josh Taylor is in the UK. And Teofimo Lopez as well, because, you know, it's two fighters make a fight, so I think they're having it in the wrong place. It should be in Scotland, and they would have done a lot bigger numbers if it was. Anyway, talking about the fight and talking about the fighters, I think Teofimo Lopez, for an former undisputed champion, he's an incredible fighter. I will say that. I think he's a very, very good fighter, but there's been better fighters who haven't been able to call themselves an undisputed champion. And you look at how he done it and how he won it. He beat Lomachenko, one of my favourite fighters, not just now, but of all time. An amazing fighter. But he's much bigger than Loma. Loma could probably still do featherweight. And he was injured during the fight, and it was a reasonably tight fight. So he beat Loma, became undisputed, and then he lost in his very next fight to Kambosos, who is a good fighter again, but by no stretch of the imagination, an unbelievable, fantastic fighter that we're going to be remembering in decades to come. But he's still a good fighter. I think even if you go a little bit further back, when he was, you know, they were on the hype train, they were talking about how good this guy was going to be. He fought a Japanese fighter called Nakatani. Didn't look very good in that fight. And he fought Kami, blew Kami away, which was a good win. But the Loma win, I think, is something that kind of inflates his persona a wee bit, and people, because of that, think he's maybe a better fighter than what he is. Still a very good fighter, but I don't think he's the fighter that everybody thinks that he is. And saying that as well, since he's moved up to light welterweight, I don't think he's looked as good at light welterweight, which kind of suggests that he used his size and his strength to his ability to bully fighters. I'm not saying he's a weight bully, but there's a sense of that a little bit. Hasn't looked as good up at light welter. Sandor Martin in his last fight, I think, probably should have nicked it. Sandor Martin's a good fighter, but again, kind of just not quite world class, just on that fringe. Josh Taylor in his last fight, I've said it publicly, Josh is my friend, as is Jack Catterall, but I thought that Jack Catterall won that fight. We don't need to go over that again, but I think the whole world probably thinks that. And deep down, Josh probably thinks it too, but he knows that he has to perform better than he did against Jack Catterall. And I know he's a better fighter than he was against Jack Catterall. I suppose there's maybe a lot of things that take into consideration, making weight and how he done the weight, and maybe overlooking Jack a little bit, but that's not a takeaway from Jack's performance, which was very good. So I think he's a bit of a point to prove here, and still to prove to people that he is the number one fighter at light welterweight on the planet before he eventually moves up to welterweight, which I think he will do pretty soon. So I don't think he makes the weight that comfortably anymore. So this fight, big fight, as I've said, went under the radar. I think that it's just a shame that it's in such a small arena. I would love to have been there, but I mean, having it in a 5,000 capacity arena, a fight of this magnitude, just doesn't really make sense to me. But anyway, it is what it is. Who wins the fight? I think Josh Taylor wins the fight, and I think that he wins it by late stoppage. I also want to make a point about some of the things that Teofimo Lopez has said about Taylor. Not talking about Taylor specifically, but talking about fighters and talking about killing people and people dying in the ring. And we all know that this is a dangerous sport. It was only a fight a few weeks ago in Belfast where a South African fighter had to be put into an induced coma. And a lot of people were worried about his life. So some of these things that he has said have been out of order. And I think something should happen. I think there should be sanctions in place for fighters when they do say these outrageous things. And we all know, look, I don't know if he means it. I hope he doesn't mean it, but I think that he's probably just looking to get a little bit of attention. We all know that he's had issues with his mental health and stuff previously, but that doesn't excuse the things that he said. I think they're horrendous. They're horrible. I think that he should apologise for them, and I think he should be sanctioned for them as well. But going into the fight, or back to the fight, I think Taylor wins by late stoppage. I think that Lopez hasn't looked as good up at light welterweight. I think Taylor has a point to prove. I think he will be better than he was against Jack Catterall. And I think he'll have the bit between his teeth. I think that Lopez, without contradicting myself, may have been a bit of a weight bully. May have been someone who's, because of his size, he had success. I see this being competitive for a while. Josh Taylor will then take over, and then Josh Taylor, I think, will stop him in the late rounds.